Hello again. Now that we understand what causal analysis is, we are ready to talk about outcome evaluations. An outcome evaluation attempts to document whether or not a program caused an improvement among the participants on what it was intended to improve. Outcome evaluations have the purpose of assessing the merit and worth of a program in terms of its capacity to achieve what the program was intended to achieve when it was planned. So why do we conduct outcome evaluations? Well, assessing the merit and worth of a program is important because remember that the main goal of programs is social betterment, is to make the world a better place for someone. And outcome evaluations play a very important role because they tell us what works and what doesn't. And in a democratic system, we need information about what or decision makers need information to make decisions, or the right decisions on what programs to fund and which programs to cut. So knowing how effective a program is in achieving some outcome is important to not waste money and to utilize the money that we have as a society, or the resources we have as a society, to do the best we can for the greatest amount of people. So that is the role of outcome evaluations. In my experience, there are at least 6 steps involved in conducting an outcome evaluation. First, we talked about this, you need to understand the program theory and its expected outcomes, right? This means understanding the logic model. 2, you need to assess if an outcome evaluation is appropriate at that point in time. It not always is. 3, you need to determine the research design that you will use for your causal analysis. Remember that causal analysis is the mode of inquiry for an assessment of merit and worth. It's pretty much the only one you can use, or you should use. After you have determined your research design, you will go and collect your data using this research design. After that, you will analyze the data, and finally, you will interpret what the results mean. So let's go over each of them. The first one is understanding the program theory and its expected outcomes. Well, before we can do any work in an outcome evaluation, we need to understand at the outset, what was the program intended to accomplish? Why do we have this program in place? Right? Remember, in the program planning lectures, we talked about that every program has to have some outcome objectives. And it has to have a theory on how you're going to achieve those outcome objectives, right? You need some inputs, you need some activities, you need some outputs that will get you to those outcome objectives, which will ultimately get you to your social impact we want to achieve, right? And these outcome objectives had to state what was supposed to change as a result of the program, who was going to benefit from it, when the change was supposed to take place, and how the change was going to be measured. Now we're going to refer about this measure of the outcome as an outcome measure. Without a clear and established outcome objectives for the program, we cannot conduct an outcome evaluation. If we don't know what the program's outcomes were supposed to be, we cannot evaluate anything. So this is the basic step, even before you agree to conduct an outcome evaluation, is to know what the program outcomes were. So the program outcome objective, like what we talked about, is going to state what is the intended change expected for participants, right? And these changes can be changes in knowledge, changes in attitudes, changes in behaviors, changes in skills. And sometimes these changes can be measured in different ways, right? So we need to be clear about how we are measuring those outcomes, those changes. Well, in a well-defined outcome objectives, they should have a measure of how, or an indication of how they were supposed to be measured. But sometimes they won't come with that. So we need to decide as evaluators what the outcome measures are going to be for a particular outcome, right? And the outcome measures refer to the specific manner in which this expected change, right, in the outcome is going to be quantified. So for example, if we have as an outcome, expected outcome that participants will experience a reduction in drinking behavior, let's say. Well, how are we going to measure that, right? We need a specific measure, right? That's measured by the change in the number of binge drinking episodes in the last 3 months. So we're going to ask participants about their binge drinking episodes in the last 3 months. And that's how we're going to measure this change in drinking behavior, right? There could be other measures for this too, right? But that has to be clear and established and agreed upon the stakeholders in the evaluation. If we were going to, let's say our outcome for the program was participants will increase their knowledge of HIV, then we may measure that knowledge with a standardized test for that, right? We're going to test participants on their knowledge before and after, let's say, right? So these are outcome measures. We need to think not only of the outcome, but also specifically how we're going to measure that outcome, that change. And this measure has to be, of course, quantifiable. So we're still in step 1. So, but this is the most crucial step, or one of the most crucial steps, right? If there is no outcomes, and is there no outcome measures for this, if there is no agreement on what the outcomes were or what the outcome measures will be, then you stop. You as an evaluator cannot do anything else. An outcome evaluation cannot be conducted like this. So if you don't have good program theory with very clear outcomes and outcome measures, then you're done with step 1. And your work may be to just focus on what the people want their outcomes to be, right? Go back to the planning stage as a part of a process evaluation that could be, but you cannot conduct an outcome evaluation without clear outcomes or outcome measures. If you do have outcome measures and clear outcomes and an understanding of the program theory, then you go to step 2. You have to assess if the outcome evaluation is appropriate at this time, right? Remember that when you embark on an assessment of merit and worth, the program may not always be ready for it, right? And we talked about this when we discussed process evaluations. It is not a good idea to conduct outcome evaluations if we don't have an evidence, clear evidence that the program was implemented as intended. Right? If we don't know if the program was implemented correctly, then conducting an outcome evaluation is sometimes a waste of time and resources because we will not be able to interpret the results of it, right? If we don't find any positive results in the outcome evaluation, we won't know if it was because the program was not implemented correctly or maybe the theory is wrong. So we should not conduct an outcome evaluation, or it's not appropriate to conduct an outcome evaluation when you don't have a process evaluation completed where you know if the program was implemented as intended. Additionally, when you don't have alternative programs for a problem, or when you don't understand the problem very well, it is not very useful or appropriate to conduct outcome evaluations, because even if you conduct an outcome evaluation, you won't have anything to replace the program with. And so it's sometimes a waste of resources to do so. So this is a very important step, because even if the program has clear outcomes, from the planning stage, right, and outcome measures, it's not always a good idea to conduct a program outcome evaluation if you don't have a process evaluation in place. If you have that, if you have clear outcomes, and if you have outcome measures, and if you have a very good indication or evidence that the program was implemented as it was intended, then you go to step 3. And in step 3, you're going to determine what is the research design that you're going to use as part of your causal analysis. Remember, you have to prove in an outcome evaluation that the program caused some outcome, or get as close to it. So you need to choose the research design. We learned when we were talking about causal analysis that, of course, causal analysis is the best and only mode of inquiry for assessment of merit and worth, because it's the only one that is going to tell us if something or if the program caused an outcome. Right? Remember that causal analysis, when we're performing causal analysis, we need to demonstrate with our research design that there was a statistically significant change in outcomes, right, for participants when compared to non-participants. That's one of the things we need to prove. We also need to prove that the difference between participants and non-participants was not there before the program. And lastly, we need to make sure, or that we need to demonstrate, that there's no other variables, and in this case there's no other participant characteristics that explain the difference, right? Or that explain that, or are related to both participants' probability of participating in the program and also related to participants' outcomes. If you don't understand this, you need to go back, look at our lecture on causal analysis. But these are the 3 conditions we must satisfy, or these are the 3 things we need to demonstrate to say that the program caused the expected outcome, right? We also talked about the randomized controlled trial being the gold standard design for causal analysis. And we discussed the elements of the experimental design when we talked about causal analysis. So we're not going to go deep on those. A randomized controlled trial has both an experimental group, right, or the participants, and a control group. It has a pre-test and a post-test. And very importantly, it has random assignment of participants into intervention and control group, right? Experimental and control group. If we don't have this design, all of these components, then we don't have a randomized controlled trial. But there are other designs that that people use that are missing some of the components of a randomized controlled trial, and we discussed some of those. Now, we also talked about randomized controlled trials, of not being able to implement randomized controlled trials in some cases. Sometimes it is not feasible, sometimes it is not legal, sometimes it is not ethical to conduct experiments. So we must rely on some other designs that get us as close to an experimental design as we can. And we talked about some of those, right? And some of the caveats of using these other designs, right? So when we talked about the one group post-test only design, the only thing that you are looking at is at the outcomes for program participants after the program, right? You're missing a pre-test, you're missing a control group, you're missing random assignment. So you don't have any of the elements. And you see the results for the participants, but you cannot say anything about the program causing any change for this, because we are missing We don't know whether the difference in outcomes between participants and non-participants, right? If there is one, we don't know if this difference, if there was one, came before the program, or we don't know if this result that we observe is the result of some other variable. So just looking at our participants at the end of the program tells us pretty much nothing. Another type of design is the one group pre and post test design, where we have a pre-test for our participants, and after we do the intervention, we do a post-test for them. On this one, we can test whether there's a difference between participants when they started and when they ended the intervention, right? Now, with this design, we cannot say that the program caused any change because we don't know if there is a difference between participants and non-participants. And we don't know if this change, right, wouldn't have been there without the program, right? And we don't know if there's some other variable that caused this change other than the program. Another type of design is the static group comparison design, where you have a post-test for the participants and also for some comparison group, right, that was not randomly assigned. And here we can see if there is a difference between participants and non-participants, but we cannot observe if this difference was not there before the program, and we cannot rule out the possibility that this difference is caused by something else other than the program. There is also, and this is one that is commonly used, is the non-equivalent comparison group design, where we have a pre-test and a post-test for participants and some comparison group, right? We observe this comparison group before and after the program, and here we can compare if there was a difference between participants and non-participants. We can also compare if the difference, or assess if the difference was there before the program or not. But one thing we're missing is, of course, ruling out the possibility that this difference that we observe between participants and non-participants is not caused by some third participant characteristic or for some third variable that is related to both participation and the outcome. And of course, the one that we are trying to get to is the randomized controlled trial design, where we have all the elements and we can address all the components of causal analysis. Like I said, some evaluators use these other designs, and that is okay, as long as you understand what you are missing and what you're getting from those results. If a randomized controlled trial is not feasible and you are required to do an outcome evaluation, sometimes the sponsors say, you need to produce an outcome evaluation as best as you can. And you will choose one of these non-experimental designs, right? And it's okay to do that, but you need to understand what you are getting from those results. And people who are going to be consumers of those evaluations, of those results, they need to understand what your design is going to give them, right? They cannot be assuming that you're going to bring some causal results when in fact you are not using a design that would allow you to do that, right? So it's important that you understand what you're getting into if you don't use a randomized controlled trial, and that the sponsors understand what they are going to get. Let's say you have agreed on a research design, and even if it's a randomized controlled trial or not, but you have agreed on that, that's what's going to happen, and you implement it. So now what you need to do is to collect your data, right? And it depends on what your outcome measure is and what your research design is, right? Your outcome measure is going to determine what you are going to measure from your participants, what data you're going to need. If it's a test, you need to test the participants or and the non-participants. If it is some survey, you need to do that survey. If it's some observation, you need to conduct that observation based on the outcome measure, right? If you have a pre and a post, remember to do that before the intervention and after the intervention, right? So you need to be very clear on who is going to collect the data and how. Sometimes the people conducting the program are not the best people to collect the information. So ideally, the outcome determines the outcome measure, and the outcome measure, of course, determines the data that we need. However, in many evaluations, there are data constraints, right? Sometimes we cannot get to all the outcome measures we would like to get. So sometimes participants leave the program and it's very hard to measure that. Sometimes the data is not available to us. So data collection is also bounded by reality, right? And on the ground, sometimes we cannot get to everything that we wanted to get. And the evaluation, of course, may have to adjust in while it's happening. I think it's important, and some evaluators have a different philosophy. Let's say I come from the philosophy that the evaluation has to adjust to the program reality and not the other way around. The program should not adjust to the evaluation. It's the evaluation that should adjust to the program. And when you come with that philosophy, then it allows you to be a little more flexible in what is possible and what is not in the evaluation. And you can only find that out when you are conducting one. It's hard to plan for everything. And sometimes reality slaps you in the face, as they say. Once you've collected your data, one of the last steps is to do the data analysis, right? How are you going to analyze the data? What have you collected here? And in this table, I have some of the most common analysis that you do depending on the research design that you chose, right? So, and really the analysis that you do in a causal analysis, really comparison analysis, right? You're comparing the outcome measure for one group to the outcome measure with the outcome measure of the other group, or against the outcome measure for the other group. So when you have a one group pre-test or post-test design, you really, or one group post-test design only, there's no comparison to make. So the only analysis that you do is describe the outcome measure for the program participants. That's the only analysis that you can do. You can do no comparison. If you have a one group pre-test and post-test design, you can compare the outcomes for participants before and after the intervention, right? That's the only comparison that you can do. And you can do the average difference between pre and post outcomes in a matched analysis, right? Get for each participant, what was their outcome before, what was the outcome after, and do that, right? It's not going to give you a complete causal analysis, but you can get some information from that comparison. What did they gain? When you use the static group comparison design, and this is when you have the post results for participants and for some comparison group, you can compare these both groups, right? You can get the average of outcome measure for participants and compare that to the average of the outcome measure for non-participants, right? After the program. That's the only comparison you can do. When you have a non-equivalent comparison group design, right? This has pre and post for both participant and control group or comparison group. You can do lots of comparisons there, right? You can compare the outcome measure before and after for participants. Then you can compare, or you should compare, the outcomes before and after for non-participants, right? This comparison group. You can compare the the outcome measures for participants versus the comparison group before the intervention, and you can compare the outcome measure for participants and the comparison group after the intervention. So you can do 4 different types of comparisons here. And you can even get a difference in difference comparison at the end, which is how much the intervention group, right, changed, and compared to how much the comparison group changed. This difference in change or difference in difference is a program effect, right? However, you don't know if this effect was caused by the program in this comparison because it wasn't randomly assigned. But in the randomized controlled trial, you can use the same 4 comparisons, right? The change, comparison before and after for both groups, right? Participant and control. You can do the before and out, the before comparison for participants and non-participants, on the after for participants and non-participants. And you can do this difference in difference, how much the participants change and how that compares to how much the non-participants change. This difference in the change or difference in difference is the program effect that you're looking for in a randomized controlled trial. And once you have these comparisons that you've made, the last step is to interpret your results, right? So it is important to know what your results mean and to communicate those reports in a direct and honest way, right? If you cannot find any difference, you have to say so. If you're using a randomized controlled trial, you have to say, hey, we did this, we compared participants to a control group, randomly assigned, and we found no statistically significant difference. There was, the change for participants was the same as the change for non-participants, for the control group. And that's not something that program people want to hear. They want to prove that they're doing a good work, and sometimes they may believe they're doing good or causing some change. And but you as an evaluator, you have the obligation, even if you're working for them, to tell the truth and say, hey, given this design, given this data collection, these are my results, and you cannot change those. No matter who wants what. There are, you have to be an independent evaluator, regardless of who is paying. And that is because if you lie or if you are not honest with the results, the scientific community or the evaluation community, they're going to know. They're going to find out eventually. So if you're going to be a professional evaluator, don't do it. Also, if you conduct if you use a research design that is not a randomized controlled trial, and you find, let's say, some differences, you can say that, well, we found some differences between participants and non-participants, or we found differences in the pre or in the post compared to the pre, but you have to state, however, we cannot say that this difference was caused by the program because we did not use a randomized controlled trial. We cannot rule out the possibility that the results or that the difference was not there before, or we cannot rule the possibility of some other variable causing this difference, right? So it's okay to say, to give your results and give your, the shortcomings of your design, right? State there, we couldn't implement a randomized controlled trial, we did this design, and this is the problem with this design. And the reader is going to interpret that, but it has to be stated clearly and explicitly, right? Do not make the results, when you do not use a randomized controlled trial, you should not use this causal language, right? You should not say that the program caused this change. You should refrain from that. You should say, we see some differences, but we cannot say that these are causal, right? That would be the way to do that. In summary, when you're interpreting and presenting your results, always be honest about what you can say, and more importantly, about what you cannot say about the program in terms of it causing the difference in outcomes, right? So now, there is one more step that is about how do you communicate these results. But we're going to talk about that in the next lecture. For now, I want you to be clear about the 6 steps that we talked about for outcome evaluation. And those are, of course, understanding the program theory and the expected outcomes, and the outcome measures, of course, and assessing if an outcome evaluation is appropriate. And if it is, if you have steps 1 and 2 in place, then you determine your research design that is possible for you to implement. And if everybody agrees on that, then you go into your data collection, then your data analysis, doing these comparisons, and finally interpreting your results. We'll talk about how to communicate these results in the next class. See you then. Take care.